All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And have we got an exciting show for you today? We have got the second part in our two-part buyer's agency episode where we cover the cons, Ben, of using a buyer's agent. We also talk to you about the risks associated with a buyer's agent. What else do we cover, mate?
Well, then logically off the back of that, we're going to talk about how to choose a good one and what sort of things you need to think about. And Bryce, in what's making property news, which property market segments are on the move? We'll give you a bit of an update around the country.
Which segments are on the move? You've got to check that out, folks. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And, of course, welcome back to you too, mate.
Mate, we're June now. We're coming into... Just a little reminder to everyone, it's tax planning. You need to be making sure supers, you've got everything in order, you're in business, you want to be buying some of those assets so you can get your instant asset right if you've had a good year. So, this is the time you look at the tax depreciation schedules. You're going to be scrambling now, but we will say it, it's really important that, this is the time you start doing some tax planning. So, if you haven't checked out the previous episodes we've done on tax planning with Julie Hartman, here's a plug to go back and have a listen to the latest episode on that from a few weeks ago, because this is the time. People don't wait till the 11th hour until the 29th of June and you're trying to scramble getting the money's not cleared in the account. Especially for your super stuff. It's important. So
26 days, folks. As we go to air today, for those of you who are up to date, you've got 26 days. So if you're not up to date, you might not have 26 days, but importantly, Ben, the message that you've just shared is don't leave it to the last minute. If you've got things to do now, do it now. Hey, we got an exciting event coming up, Ben, on the 1st of July, Tuesday, the 1st of July, because a couple of weeks ago, our book launched. So we're very excited about how that lands in the marketplace. And you can... If you haven't got your copy, Ben, you can go to Amazon, QBD, Big W, Booktopia, Dymocks, and where you can sell all good bookstores. But you and I are going to be in Sydney, so it's a little shout out to our community that we would love to meet you. Please come and say good day. So, Ben, we're going to be at the Dymocks flagship store on George Street in Sydney on the 1st of July between 6 and 7:30 p.m. Now, this is not at our expense. It's Dymocks are charging $12 per ticket, but we've got 5 tickets that we are going to be giving away. So there's some details in the show notes on how you can get that. But the link to the event is, as you're doing there for the visual watchers here, Ben, it's thepropertycouch.com.au/Dymocks, DYMOCKS. Almost sounded like the Mickey Mouse thing, didn't it? M-I-C-K. I distracted. So there'll be light refreshments. I think there's going to be a couple of vinos, Ben. Maybe even a Sherby. So
maybe.
But the books will be available for sale there on the evening, and Ben and I are happy to. I'm happy to sort of scribe Carn the Dockers. You're happy to scribe Carn the Pies. Whatever opportunity we get, we'll take that. But we're excited about the launch, and we're excited about actually meeting some people, Ben, because after doing this for 10 years, you and I, it's usually you and me looking at each other and talking to these microphones, and we don't get to press the flesh with the folks. So it'll be a nice opportunity to hopefully do that.
And thank you to all of those people who have gone out and bought the book, and we're in the charts.
Yes.
So thank you everyone for that. It's really nice. And I've got a couple of other little bit of housekeeping business if I can, Bryce. Quick one, obviously important to the Moorr, but the MyKnowledge. Oh, thank you for the book, little plug there. I see what you're doing. In terms of MyKnowledge, we've been getting some great feedback. We've curated all of that information.
Yeah,
so if you go to Moorr, double there it is right there. If you go there, you'll have all of that free, rich information. There's a couple of other opportunities there and learning more about how we can educate you to make smart property decisions. Now, my final little bit of housekeeping, Bryce, can you just come closer, a little bit closer to the camera for me? I'm just, yeah, no, I reckon there's just a little bit more salt than pepper there, mate. What does it feel like to be 50? You're a couple of weeks in.
Unprovoked attack, mate. That's an unprovoked attack.
Well, I've waited for you to settle in. Now you've got a big 5-0 in front of you. How are you feeling?
Have I got a few extra wrinkles there? Hey, listen, I don't look 50. I don't think like I'm 50. I don't act like I'm 50. So it's just a number. But to say that it hasn't played a little bit of mental gymnastics on my mind to start to think, mate, middle age is 38 and you're 50. So, but no, I had a wonderful experience, Ben.
Yes.
I could not have celebrated my 50th lap around the sun any better. I promise you, we had an amazing time.
We'll have more to talk about that. We're putting a package together. It's just, it was a great time.
It was a wonderful time. So thank you for highlighting that, and thank you for this community that got behind the well wishes I received and the money that they donated and the people that we got to impact. So
I think we'll give it about 20 in the next show, I think, in terms of what you raised, because it's incredible effort of what you've done. Yeah. Incredible.
Collectively, in my whole entire life, I think I'd raised, if it was somewhere between $500 and $1,000, including the little book clubs when I was a kid, I was really.
Well, we did that. I think, did we get to 10 grand on Movember or thereabout? I think we did something there, which was nice.
Yeah. That was driven by the Stig and you, and there was a big collective. So I'm surrounded by wonderful people. Hey, my Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, is ever since you put me onto this guy, I love the way that he thinks. Right, so he was recently on Diary of a CEO, Morgan Housel, and he dropped this little wisdom bomb. I thought, oh gosh, I've got to let that land. I've got to share it with everyone. And it was this, right? Don't aim to be happy. Aim to be content. Oh, nice one. Okay. He goes, we chase money for happiness, but happiness is just a sugar rush. Contentment is the gold. He goes, it lasts. It grounds you. It's the exhale most of us are really craving. So think about it. When you picture that dream life, you're imagining contentment, not joy, not hype, just peace. So the takeaway that I got from that is, the real flex is be content with less while the world chases more. I just love the clarity of thought that man thinks, Ben. I can listen to him all day.
I love his pod. I'm a regular listener to it. And I think, look, most of the research also says, we've talked about money doesn't buy happiness. We understand that. We understand experiences are part of that contentment sort of piece. But most people in terms of the idea of financial security, if people feel like they've got financial security, they can lift their eyes up in terms of, well, how does that then allow me to have the time, the breathing time, the exhale time to have that contentment? But to your point, a lot of us then still chase that. And it's human nature. We chase that, maybe a nicer house, or maybe a nicer car. It happens, in terms of that. And I think, it'd be interesting to see, in terms of Morgan's own affairs, has he actually upgraded the house or not? Whereas
he did talk about that. He said his life is remarkably boring. But he says what he does is he optimizes for the independence that having large cash reserves gets him. He says it's actually every dollar I save is a deposit into the freedom I crave so much. He says he doesn't crave the things, he craves that freedom. But Ben, interestingly, to your point there, part of the discussion, it made me think about it for a number of days afterwards when I listened to it. He goes, we're not hardwired to accumulate wealth. We're actually hardwired to accumulate status. And I'm like, oh, okay, fair enough. That doesn't kind of make sense. But he goes, remember back in the cave days, the only amount of wealth that you had was what you could carry, right? But he says your pecking order in the tribe was all about status. And so that was part of the conversation that he had around this contentment, because we all seem to be optimizing for wealth. But what we're probably all trying to optimize for is status. And so we've got to be careful who we're chasing the status for, because what we do know is most people are not thinking about us anywhere near, well, actually not at all, and anywhere near as much as we think they are. So we're spending money trying to buy things to impress people who aren't even looking at you, right? So aim to be content, don't aim to be happy, because we're optimized, like we're hardwired for that status piece. And pretty profound.
But we do leverage that understanding of status in property. You and I talk about owner-occupier appeal.
Yeah.
We talk about the fact that the vast majority of the people that we're trying to change their mindset on, they won't change. Social envy, status, success, having this sense of making it. As that keeps going on in Western societies, that creates pressure on scarcity, land values, property. And as smart investors, we get on the coattails of that.
We
ride
that story.
Ironically, we're trying to tell people not to worry about that.
Yeah.
It's, at the end of the day, we're getting a return on investment off the back of that.
Well, no, you're right. We're optimizing for human nature. Like, we're not going to change everyone. So when you're making investment decisions, you go with the trend, but within your own life, you. Dave Ramsey says it the best on his podcast, Ben, at the beginning. He says, where the paid off mortgage is greater than the BMW. No, where the paid off mortgage is becoming the status symbol of choice, replacing the BMW. Right. So he's saying the wonderful contentment that you have of having no mortgage and that freedom. But unfortunately, as much of a bumper sticker as that is, and as much as I agree with a lot of what Dave Ramsey's saying, but he's saying pay cash for everything, never get into debt. Obviously, we've built 10 years saying that you should get into productive debt.
We don't want the debt, but it leverages the return.
It's a tool. Yeah. And if you see there's three types of debt, which we talk about in the book, well, then we're talking about number three, definitely not number one, and trying to pay off number two as quickly as you can. So, anyway, so
I wish I could went on a good tangent there, did we?
Well, stuff matters. Like most success happens between the ears, and you and I have been spending a lifetime trying to help people, because knowledge plus action minus leashes equals the success. All right, Ben, I'm very excited about today's episode. It's part 2 of what we started last week around buyer's agents and should you actually use one. So we really set the scene on what they are, why you consider using them, who they're for, who they're not for, who doesn't need one. We went into a lot of detail around that. We talked about what they actually do, and we talked and we finished last week's episode around the pros of using a buyer's agent, right? So that's we built the apex, but now we want to talk about the cons. What are the cons of actually using a buyer's agent? And I guess the first one's obvious, Ben.
That's right, Bryce. I mean, ultimately, the number one thing is cost, right? And so when you're thinking about the value equation, what you're talking about is value is equal to benefit over cost. And in this particular case, this is why most people might choose not to necessarily use a buyer's agent. And it could be for a couple of reasons. I mean, ultimately, they've got a budget. And having that budget, and they're thinking, well, if the buyer's agent fee is going to be 20 grand, I could have potentially put that $20,000 into buying that property. And it might have got me a better property, or I might have been able to use that as negotiation. So I can understand why people might think initially in that way. But, when once they take the irrational element out of that and that emotional element out, the concept is really, really simple in the sense that, what is the value, the benefit that I'm getting over the investment that I'm making? And I think that that's an important one. But they charge a fee. It's, as I said, it's flat or a percentage of the purchase price. Now, if they've got those razor-thin budgets, then that might reduce their stretch. But that's ultimately what you've got to do, is you've got to weigh out that cost against the saving or potentially the future gain that you're going to make. But that's the first con that most people need to get past before they consider using a buyer's agent.
And it goes back to what you said last week around, Ben, how, what if your mates in the pub says, what do you need one for? Like, it's like that's one of the biggest ones to overcome. So for us, we get it. We get it. And hopefully for all the reasons we talked about, you can see the benefit. Second one is something that Jason Vella would corroborate with us, Ben, is that trust matters, right? So if you're not inspecting the property yourself, like it could be interstate or you're overseas or time poor or whatever, you're heavily relying on someone else's judgment. And therefore, the trust component becomes non-negotiable, but you have to do your homework on who you're working with, right? And so we obviously dedicated a whole episode around this, and what was it? Moldy eaves, burnt out vans. There was a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't disclosed to Jason in that experience that he had, and he disclosed that it was from his perception, it was a top tier buyer's agent. So this is really important, and you have to get to work on doing your homework on who you're working with, and that's really the art of being able to select the right person. How do you know if there's someone to be trusted?
Yeah. Now the next one's an interesting one because it just comes to this whole human behaviour debate around how we judge others. And, having worked in the buyer's agency space and in that industry, it's interesting to see the opinions that certain buyer's agents have of other buyer's agents, right? And the judgments that they might make. I mean, at the end of the day, if a customer is shopping around different buyer's agents, it's interesting to be a fly on the wall because I suspect, I don't want to say anything negative about them, however, or whatever that might look like. So the reality is that like in any industry or professional, certain people have great skills, certain people have elite skills, others have general skills. And so the industry like we're in, there is going to be people who are rookies. There's going to be people who are absolute rock stars in terms of the way in which they go about it. Now, part of your investigation in terms of if they aren't created equal, what are you getting around the sum of the parts is my point that I like to think about here. What sort of training and qualifications have they gone through? Have they been mentored by some of the other team members in that particular enterprise to get their skills to that area? Are they collaborating on discussing different markets and streets? Are they working in concert together, as a couple of buyers agents and field support and the research team that might be at head office sort of pulling all of that information together? Because the reality is, to create a Roger Federer, as an example, he had at least a dozen coaches to be the best of his craft. And I suspect that's going to be the same. So when you are thinking about not all buyers agents are created equal, you then need to say, well, okay, if I am going to consider a rookie, or if I'm going to consider a business that's done only a couple of hundred purchases versus a business that's done over 4,000 purchases, what is the reviews? What is the information from the street saying? But also internally, what value are they stacking up as part of that particular story, right? Because the reality is you are going to be paying a fee for the work that they do. And, we've all had experiences with doctors, potentially with mechanics. So it's no different really with buyer's agents in terms of how we think about that. So, and the fee that you pay, if it's really, really low, you've got to ask yourself, well, maybe that's because some of the research they're doing or some of the resources that they've got or some of the support that they've got isn't necessarily at a high strength. So they're trying to sell on price. And so you could argue, pay peanuts, get monkeys. I don't want to be disrespectful for people who are starting out in the industry because I am an abundance thinker. But the reality is when you stack up all of the runs on the board, the experience that they have, the experience of the broader team, how they have been trained, how long they've been doing that work, you will start to organise buyer's agent in an order of skill and priority, the same way in which we do that with our footy stars and in life in general.
Yeah, it's not the place where you want to bargain on fees because it's the net. Remember, it's the net that you're after. But not all buyers agents are created equal, Ben. And if they are charging a low fee, and to give you for $1 million, you're probably paying $15,000 to $20,000 for $2 million, you're probably paying 30 to 50,000, right? So if they're well outside of that, have a little look under the bonnet why. The next con of a buyer's agent really comes down to communication, and that can make or break the experience, right? So you have to have a good experience with it. There has to be some form of gelling, right? Because there are some difficult conversations that need to be had, and those difficult conversations need to be had from a place of connection and trust, not from a place of adversarial, right? The other thing that comes from a lack of communication is throughout the process, the buyer should always feel like they're on the same side of the table as the buyer's agent, right? And if you feel like you're on the other side of the table, that's a problem. That's a communication breakdown. That's on the buyer's agent for not bridging that gap. We should be working on this together. So one of the ways that our team does that, Ben, is we try and communicate to the best of our ability regularly, and also we don't just present properties to clients. We actually tell them the ones that we looked at that weren't suitable and why. And that's a very powerful connection point for our team with the client, because here's what we say. We're never in a hurry to find a property, but when we find a property, we're in a hurry. And that's an important distinction, because you should get a phone call from your buyer's agent and they should say, game on, we've got one. And the relationship should be such that the client says, great, what do you need me to do? Right? That's where the relationship should be at that point. Not, oh, are you sure? Why? Like, we haven't done enough groundwork. And the reason is because that is where the buyer's agent is earning their keep at that point, because then they've got to go, you're in, I'm in, great, let me go to work. And at all times, we have to feel like we're going to battle together. So this communication is really, really important. And I always say to our team, Ben, that you cannot overinvest in the relationship with the client early, because when the heat's in the kitchen, we don't want to be getting to know them at that point. So we've got a very deliberate process around how we make sure the client connection happens as far up the ground as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important one, Bryce, because if my buyer's agent can't articulate why this property, now I also want to put a caveat on that, because when I'm talking to my clients as a buyer's agent wearing my hat, I'm sort of saying, look, it's unrealistic for me to be giving you untruths around the fact that I know across Australia that this property is the absolute very, very best property to buy right now at this absolute price point. That's like a stockbroker basically saying, I know globally around the world right now that this stock buying at this price is the best thing I can possibly do for you. So that is an untruth, and it's impossible for them. Now, they might get lucky in terms of that result. So what you've got to articulate to your client is to sort of say, look, we've done our research, we've synthesized down from state to city to areas, local government areas, down to suburb, down to street, and so forth. And we might have, say, 2 or 3 of these markets that we're operating in across Australia at the time. Now, based on all of that principle of area selection, we're now down to property selection in terms of street and location. So ultimately, I should still be, as a buyer's agent, be able to articulate, given all of that information, given your brief, this is why I'm putting this recommendation forward to you. Now, that is a good segue into the final con, and that is ultimately the responsibility of the yes, let's go, and the consent to go still rests with you, even though you're paying the fee. And a good example will be having had some recent eye surgery a year ago or so. I'm in hospital. I'm lying in the bed. I've got the anaesthetist talking to me. Before they do that, they bring in a consent form. They take me through. This is about what we're about to do. Do you consent? Do you believe that this is the right thing to do? And ultimately, the customer signs off on that. So the accountability is still ultimately with the customer. It is their money. And at the end of the day, you know, as a professional, you're trying to get them the best result. associated with that. So if you've done all your checklists well, if you've done everything to the best of your ability, that's what you're looking for. But at the end of the day, it's ultimately the client's call, whether there's consent and you proceed to the outcome, and that paperwork is then signed by the buyer, which just happens to be you who's engaged the buyer's agent.
Yeah, you're not buying in partnership. It's an agency arrangement. It's a facilitating of someone or some entity has their name on a title, and the buyer's agent is facilitating that name being taken off the title and it being put into your name. It's not a joint venture. It's not the buyer's agent having their name on the title as well. So, to your point, it is just at the end of the day going to be you left with the decision, and so ultimately that comes down to an ultimate trust game. But the other thing too is, if you're someone who wants to just totally outsource responsibility entirely, you'll be disappointed. You can't handle, like,
No.
if ultimately the decision rests with you, your name will be on the title. And at when all's said and done, the relationship, shake hands, hope you've had a great experience. You're going to be left with the property. You do not want to outsource that responsibility in its entirety. You'll be disappointed. So we say it's an agency partnership. It's not a joint venture partnership, but it's a partnership in the experience to make sure that you get what you want. So it's not just a handball.
No, I think well said. Let's change pace a little and talk about the different types of buyers. So we've touched on this obviously in part one earlier, but we want to go a little bit deeper in terms of looking at it from an investor's point of view versus an owner-occupier's point of view. I think this is important. From an investment point of view, at the end of the day, you're starting or you're building on your small private rental accommodation business, right? So the reality is that you're looking for an asset that you can attract a customer into, i.e. your tenant, and you want them to have quiet and safe enjoyment inside that asset. Now, you want that asset to hopefully have as lower costs as possible, and you want that asset to have a level of scarcity with the potential for future capital growth. And off the back of that capital growth, you ultimately want to see the rents also increase in line with the passive income that you want to generate off that property. Now, you'll hear a lot of potential buyers, agents, and property investment commentators say that the property is a combination. The current price is a combination of comparable properties in that area at that moment in time, and that is true. And that is off the back of a demand and supply measure at that time in terms of what's happening in that market. But then when you lift your eyes, you're ultimately really looking at the economic activity that's happening in that location that's attracting further demand over the decades, and see how that plays out. So as an investor, they are the considerations that you need, and you're looking for evidence from your buyer's agent and or the business that they're working for that can tell you a narrative around how they have worked out from area location down into suburb location, and then also into that individual selection at that time. The owner-occupier brief is completely different, isn't it, Bryce?
So I get thrown into a house in North Balgowlah. Some people might have heard this story before, Ben, in the upper North Shore of Sydney. And I had a film crew, pretend clients, actors who were pretend clients, a bunch of people over in the corner that were I later worked out with the producers, but they just seemed like really cold people. And so they said, right, sell this house. And I'm like, huh? Like, I'm being dramatic, but I'm like, well, let's go and stand at the front, and I'll start pointing to how close it is to a train station, and how close it is to a capital city, and how you get into, like, all the things that I'd been trained to do as an investor, Ben, a buyer's agent for investors, did not serve me one iota in that moment. And so thankfully I had a formula, Ben. I call it the 4-letter F word, that landed me a job in television, where I started pulling a story out of these people. But that was that was ultimately the difference. I'd spent a career up until that point talking about numbers on a spreadsheet and why it makes sense for the future capital growth, and zero time spending as a buyer's agent helping someone buy their dream home. So history says I got the gig, Ben. Probably if they knew what I knew back then, they probably wouldn't have given it to me. But there are definitely two different skill sets that come from being a buyer's agent in those two lanes. So clearly, with an investor mindset, we're reminding the client it's a bricks and mortar bank account. Probably you're never going to live in it. Not some people do, but probably you're never going to live in it. So essentially, it is actually an instrument to provide a financial result for you in the future versus an essential need, a roof over your head. And so therefore, depending on which buyer's agent that you speak to, you want to make sure that they understand the nuances that come from talking to those two different groups. Because quite often we have a lot of real estate agents come in and they say to me, Bryce, I'd love to be a buyer's agent. This is what I've done. And I just say to them, tell me, so here's the questions I ask them. Tell me the investment books that you've read. Haven't read any. Tell me what real estate, investing, shares, what investment paradigm training have you actually entered into up until this point? They look at me, they go, none. I go, I don't think you'd be well suited as a buyer's agent for investors because that's what you talk about all the time. I think you'd be better suited to be a buyer's agent for owner-occupiers. And so that just that distinction alone helps them and they go and pursue their craft down that way. But it's important when someone is wanting to use a buyer's agent, Ben, that they understand that not all buyer's agents are the same. Some hate dealing with spreadsheets and calculators and all the stuff that we do as investors. For some people, it's nauseating and right up there with a sleeping tablet. And for others, the emotional counselling that often requires helping someone get into their dream home, and the indecision and the often you go, pretty much all of the things you said in the brief, I've just ticked every single box, but you don't want it, and they go, no, I don't want it. So it depends on what your personality is.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And I mean, I'm looking at obviously our owner-occupied buyers agency business at the moment. We've got our first few clients that we're dealing with, and it's excellent, right? Because you're what you're trying to ask them to do is to articulate the image of what you want this property to do for you and your family, right? And it needs to. The backyard, I want to be able to look out through the kitchen whilst I'm preparing a meal and I can see the kids playing soccer out in the backyard or whatever, and I want to make sure that the family room and the living room has that sort of real warm space. And then I want a parent retreat or an alfresco area where I can, cook some nice, barbecue octopus in preparation for a dinner party or something. Like, do you know what I mean? Like
that's the choice to barbecue, man. You like the octopus?
That's the big, a little bit of lemon and definitely a lot of sea salt. But all the point I'm making there is that's what I'm trying to get a sense of, right? I'm trying to get a sense of what that story looks like, because through that I can then say, okay, well, it needs to have an open plan area at the back of the house, number one. And then it needs to have alfresco or barbecue outside. So I can start ticking off on the features associated with that. Now, it gets a little bit hard when everyone has obviously a champagne taste, but a beer budget sometimes. And so it's there still has to be some compromise. The reality is, if you do find that home that has everything, has the garage, the theatre, the parent area, the walk-in robe to die for, all of those type of things, you're paying millions for those types of types of properties. So if your budget's there, that's great. But if your budget isn't there, then the buyer's agent's art form is to basically try and to get the order of priority around location, and then what type of asset can we pick that packs the most of that into that area. Because if they then want to compromise on area, then okay, it opens up. Coming back to the buyer's decision quadrant, the principles are still real. in that particular story as well. So I'm really, I'm seeing some really wonderful feedback in terms of what's happening in that space. But to your point, there is lifestyle at play here. It's very emotional, that the transaction that you're trying to make for the customer, and if you nail that brief, you'll be friends for life, because they will always remember you as basically finding their forever home or their dream home.
And it's a fair point too, Ben, that up until recently, we had concentrated in the investment lane, because a lot of investor buyers agents don't want to fulfill an owner-occupier brief, and a lot of onyers don't want to fulfill an investment brief, or only take an investment brief if they're a little bit light on sort of clients to work with, right? So, but we had a lot of our clients going, well, that's fine, but we want your help to actually help us get our family home. So that was the genesis of that pivot. But there's two very, very different mindsets that are going on in those briefs. So there's the different types of buyers. The fee structures, let's just touch on them briefly. We've talked about it last week. We've touched on it through the episode, but there's two structures. There's flat fee and there's percentages. Flat fee is, as it sounds, this is how much you're going to pay, no matter what you spend. Whereas the percentage says, whatever you spend, multiply it by the percentage we agree on, and that's the fee. Now, the criticism of percentage model is the suspicion in the buyer's mind that have you created a conflict of interest, because aren't I coming to you because of no conflict of interest, and now you're creating a conflict of interest? I'm not going to say that's true, Ben, because a lot of buyers agents that I know, they are professional to a core, and they play the long game. They think, well, if I'm having great experiences with my clients, they're going to tell others, so they play the long game. Some may argue that that's not the case. We've just taken that out of the discussion for our investor clients. It's a flat fee, so you've got some certainty around what you're going to pay.
Yeah, so I think it's important, and in financial services, we talk about conflicted remuneration. So it's not necessarily a pure conflict of interest, but if there is an element of conflicted remuneration in terms of how people are paid, there just needs to be a conversation and disclosure around that in terms of the percentage. I just want to double click quickly on the flat fee. Your buyer's agent will usually charge it in installments. So in some respects, a lot of buyer's agents might charge it in two installments. So an example might be an initial payment that gets the process started. Then once they've done the buyer's brief or the blueprint or the strategy document, that's stage 2. And then the final payment is on an unconditional approved offer on a property. That's potentially stage 3. So I think it's just helpful to let the consumer know basically some of the stages that happen as part of the flat fee.
Yeah, and quite often that engagement fee is, I guess it's important that quite often they ask for a payment up front, Ben, is because we call it the anti-brick kicker fee, which is a play on obviously the tyre kickers, because quite often you can burn a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of kilometres, a lot of miles, a lot of conversations, a lot of phone calls. If the client wasn't quite ready to commit and there's no skin in the game up front, that can obviously be frustrating when a buyer's agent, all they have is their time. So that's why you will find a lot of buyer's agents.
And of course, that time comes at a cost. Mm-hmm. So, those initial engagement fees and so forth, in some cases, may not be refundable for some buyer's agents because they've actually done a fair bit of work. They haven't fully completed the project, but they've done a fair bit of work. So that is something to consider when you're talking or considering a buyer's agent.
Hey, Ben, what are the risks
now, Bryce?
What are the risks of using a buyer's agent? Well, I'm glad you asked, Ben, because our listeners will probably want to know what the risks are. And we teased on them, some of them that you saw in that episode that we did a few weeks ago now, Ben, with Jason Vella. So if those of you are watching, it'll be on the screen here if you want to go and check it out. For those of you listening, it'll be in the show notes. I thoroughly recommend that you go and listen to that. It was a cautionary tale about using a buyer's agent. So it's a whole episode on the risks that can be associated. But in the interest of this episode, Ben, to make sure that our listeners are fully informed here, the first risk is the one hat, many agendas problem, right? So I would love to think that our industry doesn't have this, Ben, but unfortunately, there are referral deals that happen to buyers agents or from buyers agents to listing agents or mortgage brokers or developers that actually happen that violate, in our opinion, the trust, the fundamental trust that you create in an agency arrangement between you and a client in a buyer's agency transaction. In our opinion, Ben, we are very staunch in our position on this. Is we want our income in the transaction to be 100% received from the client, not a diluted percentage that comes from some other commission, incentive, undisclosed kickback, which would create a conflict.
Well, that's the conflicted remuneration that we're talking about. And so if take it from the lens of the customer. If I knew that I was being referred from a mortgage broker to a buyer's agent who's a fee-for-service buyer's agent, then that's fine. If it's a professional introduction, as we like to refer to them, and it's a professional introduction. It's a recommendation because they believe this buyer's agent's going to do the best job for them. That's fine. Where it gets grey and where conflicted remuneration comes in is that buyer's agent, out of their fee, is going to pay $1,000 to that mortgage broker for that referral. And this absolutely happens in all parts of the real estate space. Commissions are potentially shared between different, listing people and the people who introduce the buyer. All of those things happen. So we've just got to accept that it happens in the industry, and it's called conflicted remuneration. Now, as part of that, all we ask, and in some states and territories, it's already mandatory, and you might see it in the paperwork, but just a disclosure of that should be really, really important because, if I'm being recommended to work with a particular operator, I don't want it to be because there's a self-interest in terms of that other professional getting a kickback or a soft dollar referral. So I think that one's important. And that leads into this whole idea of lack of transparency. So that's one area where there is a lack of transparency in terms of the way in which the industry operates. The other ways are also around if the buyer's agent has failed to explain to you the research behind why we're hunting in this area. If the strategy hasn't been clearly defined and hasn't been documented, and the communication process. So in terms of best practice, in a lot of these respects, I would love to see that all correspondence is recorded these days with transcripts and all of that. You can potentially record those. They can be summarized with AI, and then everyone's on the same page as you're going through that conversation. But secondly to that, we think best practice is also having a written document that basically provides evidence of the area that you're going into and why you're doing it. We call it a blueprint, okay? And ultimately that blueprint will tell us about the short, medium, long-term performance of that area. It'll tell us about the types of properties that we think are examples of, i.e. recent comparative sales, examples of markets that are properties, I should say, within that market and that area that we think are the types of properties that we're hunting for that will meet your brief as part of that particular story. So it really is important, transparency, isn't it, Bryce?
100%, 100%. So you've got the one hats, many agendas problem. You've got the lack of transparency. You also have a risk around surprise fees. So you want to make sure that when you are signing the agreement, that you are super clear on how much you're paying. And is there anything that triggers more payment at some point down the track? So you want to make sure that there's no incentives for the buyer's agent for how much you spend on a property. For us, we talked about Obviously, flat fee can really clear that up. But if you've got a percentage, you want to make sure that it's super clear on all bandwidths and all price ranges so that you know what you're getting up front.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I want to be potentially signing some type of engagement contract that is really clear about, what's going to happen. I should also, as part of the initial investigations that I'm making to select my buyer's agent to minimize risk, I want to know their process. I want to know who's going to be involved in that process. If that buyer's agent is buying interstate, I want to know, basically back to Jason's point, I want to know who is inspecting that property. So in the event that the buyer's agent can't get there, because to your point, we want to be in a hurry when the property comes to market. How are we getting that property assessed? And what we absolutely don't want to see is that assessment being done by the selling agent.
Yeah, sight unseen without a suitable proxy. We've got clients who buy sight unseen, but the proxy is well and truly with us. It's not with someone else that's
we're paying a professional to go and do that work, and those professionals have also been vetted with years of experience or decades of experience in that particular market. So they also help us in terms of, and this is where I keep saying the sum of the parts of the team, because your buyer's agent isn't traditionally working independently on their own. They usually have a team of people around them, especially, and the larger businesses like ours that allow us to basically have a fully resourced business where we've got dedicated researchers, we've got dedicated support people around, we've got proxies in areas where we need to move quickly to secure properties before they come to market. Those types of things can potentially happen. And so, this comes back to no surprise fees. So you should know basically what you're going to be paying around building and pest, any contract reviews, if there's fees associated. All of those things are going to be part of that story that should be well communicated as part of your initial conversation with your buyer's agent.
Hey folks, another risk is a great salesperson doesn't mean they're a great buyer's agent. Because some people are brilliant at selling themselves. There is a movement in the buyer's agency industry of people that are actually being trained to be really great on social media. And so they're really good at attracting attention. They're really good at attracting eyeballs. So therefore, by default, sounding like they know what they're doing. But chances are when they get out into the field, they fall into the low experience category. So I want to make sure that you ask for case studies, recent purchases, references from real clients. You want to be able to verify in some way how this person will perform in the field in the process where it matters the most, which is largely around securing the property, negotiating a great price, making sure that you don't buy anything that's a lemon. How do you do that? Ask for people that they have used and spoken to in the past. And if they can't get that to you, it indicates one of two things. One, they don't have a lot of past clients, or two, they don't have anyone that they have serviced in the past that's been given results that they want to let you talk to. So be very, 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 very mindful that they do not correlate. A great salesperson can be a great buyer's agent, but it does not. They're not directly related.
Back to the these days it very much is about Instagram and all of these people building these big profiles of themselves, which effectively generates inquiry. The question then I would ask, if they're really good at that, am I going to get you as my buyer's agent? So in other words, if they are super successful, what they'll do is they'll build a business off the back of them. But if they're the ones sort of saying, I negotiated this and I did it, and they're actually not that person, it's actually a person in behind them. So, and as we know, to buy 4,000 properties, that Bryce and I haven't bought 4,000 properties. That's our team of people who have bought 4,000 properties. Now, the reality off the back of that is that, yes, we have surgical people that perform surgical duties. That's why Bryce and I aren't out there on Instagram saying, have a look at this beautiful property I just bought, and, have a look at this great deal that I just got. we'll talk about the teams deals,
Yeah.
but we are absolutely operating as a collective in terms of the best outcomes for our clients, right?
People use that against us, Ben. Well, you're not actually getting Ben or Bryce. It's like, thank God for that, because we are not even close to in touch with the market like our team is.
No.
But they still run in the same lanes that you and I run in. They've been trained and mentored by you and I. They have the eye for what it is that you and I would buy in the marketplace. And let's be fair to them, Ben. They are at the coalface at the front, so they've actually got local market, local knowledge, local networks that you and I don't have because we haven't been amongst it for a while. So
they've got the benefit of the full-time research and the investment committee that is doing all of that analysis across the country.
Yep.
So when they go in and we basically open up a new market, what's actually happening is we're building those relationships, we're building all of those things, and we're getting in there with the surgeons on the ground, right? And that's just not something that an independent or a one or a two man shop can do. They just simply can't compete with that, with that bulk, amount of resources that we're fortunate enough to have in terms of helping our clients.
For those that are new entrants to the game, there's one other thing that we want to bring to your attention around that, and that's for someone who hasn't been involved in multiple market cycles, right? So Ben and I, we've lived through the recession we've had to have. We've been in the game when the GFC came. We've obviously been in the game Brexit. We've been in the game with the Asian bird flu. We've been in the pandemic. And we've seen things that happened during those times. Even when the market panicked last week, a couple of weeks ago, Ben, with Trump's tariffs, like it's kind of like what I found probably now maturing through a number of those cycles over many times. I just watched it and observed that, oh wow, isn't this a great time to go shopping rather than getting involved in the panic? So. That's really important that you ask for someone who's been through at least one negative event. So,
can I build on that example? I mean, I think we've got the head of REBA, which is the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association of Australia, flagging to the market because it's an unregulated market and there's no investment regulation around buyers agents, warning consumers of certain new buyers agents who don't even understand the difference between yield and growth. That's a concern. So when you talk about enthusiastic, complete amateurs, they're warning against that risk in terms of that. And I think now, remember, we believe in abundance. We believe that, we want a robust buyers agency business, and we want to make sure that everyone's working in the best interest of the customer. But you can understand the attraction of why people want to start a buyers agency business. The incomes, the commissions, they look big and large, and potentially it's an attraction for people to get into that space. But the reality is, if they've got no QPIA or investment qualifications or experience, there's going to be a risk there in terms of them understanding. And that's why we always warn people, what sort of investment strategy, what sort of documentation did they give you? How have they done their models of growth? Because if you get a plan that has a 7% growth and 3% yield, or worse still, I think the ones that are happening right now are all chasing these yield locations. So all these high yield locations where they're promoting 5% yield and they're saying, 5% yield and 6% growth. And you go and have a look at those markets, and the growth story over the last decade or 2 decades or whatever has been 4%. That's a material difference in terms of what that outcome will be for that client. So I think it's timely that the head of the association is just basically saying, not all buyers agents are created equal, and be careful of those rookies who are coming into the market.
Well, I think my final point around these risks, Ben, actually fully dovetails into that, because there's an influencing of the market that's going on, and that influence back in in the 90s, there used to be a investor called Rene Rivkin. He used to have a newsletter that he would inform his inform his newsletter subscribers on what to buy and what to sell. But that gave him a unique position to create energy and attention into a particular market and either sell or buy, depending on that. And I think there's a digital age version of that now, and that is where a buyer's agent nominates a spot and creates concentration in that spot, and by nature of that concentration on limited stock, when we've got a housing demand exceeding housing supply challenge, if you then go and generate a ton of focus and a ton of energy on a particular area, you will influence the market. That will happen. But what happens is the people who get in first and the people who get in last, that becomes a case study for growth. And so great for that person who got in first, sucks for that person who got in last, but guess who's the winner? The winner is the buyer's agent who uses the price where they got into the market, the price where the last person got into the market, and says, look, we've just done 27% in 12 months. You should use us for that reason. And folks, that is called influencing the market. And what is really the right question to ask that buyer's agent is, can you tell me if that's actually been over a longer period of time, or is that in a short period of time? Because what I'm actually interested in is playing this game for a decade. I'm not interested in playing it for 5 minutes. And so that is where you need to be aware that that is happening. But importantly, this is what we're trying to scream from the mountaintop here. That is what's being used in the marketing. But imagine being the poor old person who got in last, Ben, to solidify that growth period.
Yeah, we all want, the reason why it works in a marketing sense, Bryce, is because we all want a great, 30% return in 12 months. That's what we're all chasing naively when we're thinking about these types of things, right? Why did Bitcoin do what Bitcoin did? Why did, GameStop do exactly that? Because it got pumped.
Sure.
And so what you're talking about there is pumping the market. And I think that in itself is a risk, because what's potentially happening is that every time they buy the next property, it's going up $5,000 or $10,000, $5,000 or $10,000. And so it runs from 450 up to 600,000. They look like geniuses, but in reality, that's pumping the market. And I think that in itself is dangerous. And we want to make sure, again, because it's unregulated, it's a bit of a cowboy country in terms of what's happening there. So what would I ask those buyers agents who are telling me about this market? I would ask them, give me 3 reasons why this market will grow over the decades, and give me the evidence around the economic activity, give me the evidence about future population growth, and give me evidence about the overall gross production of output that location is going to generate, because they are the things that will drive sustained long-term growth. Now, they'll spin you and they'll say, it doesn't matter. All we need to do is get that quick little hit, and then we're going to take the equity out of that and move to the next one, right? And so it really doesn't matter whether that property then grows for the next 5 years or not, because we've already released the equity out and we're into your second or your third or your fourth. Problem with that is if they don't return growth over the long term, and they're then selling you, then we'll sell them all, right? And then, but if they stay flat for the next 5 or 6 years, you're selling into only what is potentially a subpar return. When they'll pitch to you that we're going to use this strategy to then sell them all and then buy your owner-occupied home in Sydney, as an example, and that's the way to get there. So be careful of that. There's a bit of risk around that in terms of what that particular strategy looks like.
All right, Ben, let's head for home. How do people actually choose a buyer's agent, right? So if we've convinced you that there's value, we've also warned you and informed you around where the traps and the triggers are, and who are the people that you need to avoid and who are the people that you need to embrace. How do we actually choose a buyer's agent? And I guess the first one is fundamental, Ben. For you to be able to operate in this country as a buyer's agent, you need to be working under a properly licensed business and insured within your state. So there is no moonlighting. You have to, like a real estate agent has to have a sales rep under a master license. The same exists on this side of the fence. So you need to ask if they're properly licensed and insured in their state. But then I would ask a few more questions. I'd ask, how long have you been operating? What suburbs do you specialize in? And how many properties have you purchased in the last 12 months? Because that matters. Because the amount of properties that they've been purchasing is indicative of the marketplace footprint that they have, which will mean that that'll open up some more networks, which will mean that gets more likely to be the insiders. And remember, you want a buyer's agent to be playing the insiders game. And so you want to make sure they've been around, they've been through some cycles, and they've done enough transactions to make sure that they're a big enough player in the marketplace that they do get the invitation to the inside bin.
So let's make sure we capture this in this updated episode in terms of the whole buyer's agency deep dive. The license prices are talking about. So under Real Estate Agent Act in every state and territory, if you are charging a fee or receiving a commission, you need to be a licensed estate agent or an authorised rep of a licensed estate agent. But here is the rub. There is a lot of buyer's agents who might be licensed in New South Wales or Queensland or Victoria, and they've been buying over in Western Australia for the last 18 months or whatever. Now, and they're not licensed in that state. So technically, they're in breach of the law in Western Australia in terms of not being licensed in that state to act as a licensed estate agent, but in this particular case, as a buyer's agent. So we mentioned that on a few other episodes, so just sort of have a warning. But to Bryce's point, that's the fundamental thing. It'd be horrible to know that you're working with an agent who's potentially operating illegally in terms of buying into those different states. So, who is the master license holder, and are you an authorised representative of that master license holder? Tick number one. Next point is about tell me about your story. How did you get into this? What's your proven track record? How many properties do you have in portfolio? Now we can talk about to be a cardiac surgeon, you don't have to have a heart attack, right? To potentially, be very, very good at that skill. But to be a cardiac surgeon, you need between 6 and 9 years of experience. So if you don't have your own full portfolio, then what are you resting on? Are you resting on the fact that, you've been working with others who have mentored you to do that? That's fine. Or are you part of a larger organisation that has had those runs on the board, and that you're able to sort of utilise all of the skills and tools and resources that are available in terms of working with those other larger players?
Yeah, so we've talked about this, but we want a track record. We want to make sure that ask them, what is your track record? And if they have one that's satisfactory to you, well, then you can feel comfortable that they've actually bought something that you want to do, which is cool. And then talk about their communication and find out ask them, how are you going to keep me in the loop, and how are we going to be accountable to you keeping me in the loop if I want to engage with you, and just feel comfortable with that. But as we talked about before, this is really important. I would rate this really quite high, that you need to have a rhythm and a relationship with your buyer's agent that is easy, that is strong, and the buyer's agent has to have that, because if they're going to be delivering news to you that is accountability, there needs to be a rapport that allows that to happen. If it's strained or that's not quite right, that's going to be compromised.
Yeah, and I think then it comes down to process, and communication is everything. So if I'm considering how to look at you, I want to understand your process in terms of what are you doing around investing locations. How does that framework work? What are your resources and your team around you? What are the stages that we're going to go through? And then ultimately, how are you going to communicate to me around those different stages of that process? Is that documented in a written format in some respects, as well as also all of the notes and exchanges that are happening between the two parties, to make sure that everybody knows what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and why it's going to happen, is going to be a great part of that communication story that plays out as we go through you ultimately making a decision to proceed or not to proceed on a purchase.
And the final one for me, Ben, is try and understand, to your point around the process, who's involved. Are there multiple people, or is there one person? So what do I mean by that? A day in the life of a buyer's agent who's a sole operator who's doing everything, can be flicking between getting business and servicing existing business, right? So they've got to have the initial consultations with folks up front, but then they've got to get the deals done, right? And that requires a different paradigm shift. And sometimes you'll be talking to people up front and a deal's running over here, so you need to be able to do that. But then imagine when a deal's running over here and you've got to have the skill to be able to look at properties, talk to clients, recommend properties. But then there's the detail that a lot of hunters, if you like, who love the thrill of the game, they don't love the detail. So is there separate people that are helping with onboarding clients? Is there separate people, the buyer's agent being able to just focus on inspecting properties, talking to clients, doing deals? And is there someone who's helping make sure that all of the details that need to happen between a deal being done and you settling, are they different people or are they the same person? Because I would argue the same person is going to have a lot of manicness about them because there's different speeds and gears that you need to be in depending on which paradigm you need to be in versus are there people within different lanes who are actually helping to make sure the overall experience that you have as a client more smooth and straightforward.
Yeah, and then when I'm looking at fees, I want to understand what's included and what's not included. Like ultimately, at the end of the day, Bryce talked about that being the fulfillment agent, the buyer's agent being a fulfillment agent, but there are other, events that can potentially knock over a deal, such as a really bad building and pest inspection, and ultimately the builder who is signing off on that building and pest inspection is giving an indication of where they see that property's at. Now, sometimes that can be a three-way conversation, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the responsibility still rests on the buyer of the property to sort of say whether they want to proceed or not. And that can be held in concert. Sometimes you can read these building and pest reports and you think, my goodness, this property's falling down, when it's not. But, ultimately, we've talked about this before in respect of some building and pest inspection reports can be quite negative. So are they structural? Are they going to be significant in cost? Are they going to be well flagged? And others are like, okay, there's a lot of cosmetic issues in this property, but we know what we're getting in for, and we've got a budget that will allow us to fix those cosmetic things as part of that process. So again, who's part of your buying team? Your mortgage broker, your lawyer, your building and pest inspector, and your buyer's agent, potentially coordinating all of those. But everyone needs to be on the same page through that execution, right? It can't just be done with the buyer's agent. So be really clear about what's included, what's not included, and who's part of that team to get you through to the other side.
Well, folks, we have covered some ground over the last 2 episodes. Hopefully that has actually helped you with the process of buyer's agents. Do they add value? How do I choose one? What's the pros? What's the cons? What's the risks? Hopefully we've covered all that. But there's a few final takeaways here just to round it out. First of all, not everyone needs a buyer's agent, so that's probably worth stating. But the reasons that you would is to get, if you value time, clarity, and confidence in your purchase, they're worth exploring. We talked about there's some people who can do that themselves. Choosing the right buyer's agent, essentially when we distill 2 episodes down, comes down to experience, transparency and communication, and alignment with what you want, not necessarily just their charisma or their social media claims. And finally, ask lots of questions. Look past the pitch. You're hiring a professional to actually protect your future, not just find you a property. That's important. You need to be diving deep as deep as you can to make sure that you get the right person, Ben. But I declared it in part 1. You declared it in part 1. I'm obviously a buyer's agent. You've acted as a buyer's agent. We are clearly 2 people who think that there's real value in using a buyer's agent. But if we can be as independent as we can and rise up to 30,000 feet, we don't think all buyer's agents are created equal. And therefore, I think that it's not just a case of saying I'm going to use one. It's a case of you've got to use the right one.
Yep. Just study their value proposition holistically, their processes, their proven track record. Obviously, look at reviews where you can. Not everyone is going to be super happy with everything you've done. So you've also got to weigh up, the volume of experiences that businesses have had. And yeah, you are absolutely looking for connection and communication and a feel for that person that you're going to be working with as part of, and even that company that you're going to be working with as part of going through that buyer's agency process.
Well said. So hopefully, Ben, we've provided I say rounded, some would still suggest biased, but hopefully we've given enough information for people to go, all right, maybe there is an opportunity for me to see the value that a buyer's agent has in my team, my dream team, or on the journey towards $3,000 a week in passive income.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about the rapid expansion of the number of buyer's agents in the country versus the number of people using buyer's agents, the percentage growth in the number of buyer's agents is growing quicker than the market adoption of buyer's agents. So, we've seen we're probably now in around sort of 1,200 to 1,500 buyer's agents around the country. That's great, and I love it. And I think, there's value that they do. But for those buyer's agents to also be successful, in a lot of cases, they've got to potentially do owner-occupiers and investors in terms of that work. My question for the buyer's agent who doesn't have any investment experience is what value are they bringing to the table around what is the appropriate price point to pay? Oh, don't worry about that. The mortgage broker, he's told you what you can afford. I'm just going to go out and buy it, because they're trying to lock you in for that deal. I would always be saying to people, you're about to go into the business of providing private rental accommodation. This business investment that you're about to make is probably going to be in the vicinity of $500,000 to $1.5 million. Now, if you were thinking about that in terms of buying the local hairdresser shop or the local fish and chip shop or the news agency or maybe a party business, where party hire business, and you were making that type of investment, how much time would you consider looking at the business plan and the financials and what all of that looks like? Because you are going into the business of this, and a lot of people don't go in with their eyes wide open. And so that's why having a business plan is really important. And that's why we also say, as per our book, that's why we've got the case studies at the back of the book, is to sort of show you that they're the nuances. They're the little things you need to know about the business that you're about to go in. And that's the sort of numbers that you need to see. So if you're getting a one-page business plan with your $750,000 or $1 million business, I'd be a little bit concerned about how that reflects into your broader wealth creation strategy. I think there is justification, the same sort of thing. My builder's ready to build the house, and here are the plans. And it's one A4 piece of paper or 2 pages. Yeah, build me that house there. Well, I need a little bit more detail. I need to know, the floor. I need to know the measurements. I need to know that. So I just think it is a reminder to sort of say, look, there's a lot of enthusiasm in this space. It's a fun job getting out there to go and negotiate and find and buy properties for people. But there are definitely better services out there for those out there. And of course, we're Bryce. I'm, obviously wearing my Empower Wealth hat with that conversation.
Yeah, of course you are. And I guess there's plans and there's plans, and there's a lot of plans out there that just help you with the next purchase. Our position on planning is really, really simple and really straightforward. We think that most of the planning benefit comes from having conversations that don't necessarily involve the next purchase.
Yeah.
There is so much more that needs to go into these conversations, because the purchase is just a vehicle to get the outcomes that we're actually trying to chase. It's not an end in itself. And so the challenge, when we first started, Ben, there wasn't a lot of planning, and then there's a bunch of people that listen to us and others and people that we respect in the community who do really rock solid planning. And then now there is a can I even get the word, proliferation of people who are actually doing plans that are not the true sense of what we intend those plans to mean.
I'll give you a free plan as part of my service, or I'll give you a summary report on the property but I think that, again, it's a bit like the level of the business case that you're doing and the level of understanding that you have is important. and because again, it's a significant investment that you're making. Now, we love property investing because it's a good passive investment to be in.
Yeah.
It is a good passive investment to be in. So it shouldn't take more than that sort of 20 hours a year to 20 to 30 hours a year to run if it's running well. Now, there will be times when, after 10 years of owning a property, okay, we've got to put a new kitchen in, or there's other things that, that come up. But on the whole, when we talk about side hustles and all of it, it's a good side hustle, but it's an expensive side hustle. So treat it like a business, a proper one.
Very good, well said, mate. My my life by design hack today is I promise I'll get out of this lane shortly, Ben. But I found this questions every parent should ask their kid between age 8 and 13. So I tested it the other night with my youngest, and so here's the questions. 1, what's the one thing I don't know about you? Number 2, what's the hardest part about being a kid? Because their answer tells you a lot about what they're struggling with.
Yeah.
Number 3, what's the only thing you wish adults understood about kids? Number 4 is if you could wave a magic wand and make one thing different in our family, what would that be? Number 5, what have you heard about changing bodies or puberty? Does anyone talk about this at school? Number 6, what's one thing about you that I might not know that would surprise me? And number 7, if you had to choose 5 people that made you feel the safest, who would they be? So I tried it with Samuel. It was fun. He when I asked him number 5 about the puberty one, he just looked at me and just said, I don't want to talk to you about that. So I've got some repetitions to do around that. With the 5 people that would feel the safest, that was really cool. It's kind of nice because I knew that Andrew and I would be in it, but to see who the other 3 were, that was really fun. I asked him just before he went to bed, and he was tired after a basketball game. So I said, what's the one thing I don't know about you? And he just sort of just looked up, and he wasn't quite. He goes, I'll come back to you on that. But then, what's the hardest thing about being a kid? Going to school. What's the one thing you wish about adults understood about kids that we don't want to go to school? If you could wave a magic wand and make one thing different in our family, what would it be? That you didn't tell me to go to school. There was a theme there that was fun. But anyway, the whole fun was it just created this bond and this connection that he and I had, which was fun. So you could do it at bedtime, during a car ride, around the dinner table, and asking your tween these questions. The theory, and it was nurtured first, so I'll put the link in here where I found it. You get to stay involved in their world and to show them that you care about their life. So it was fun. For those of you that are navigating tween life like me, and I put my hand up and say I'm sucking, so I'm trying to get better, that's something that you might want to try. Ben, what's making property news?
Well, mate, I thought I'd just, again, give everyone an update on the property space and look at the data and see some of the trends. Obviously, we've had the rate cut recently. So looking at, where the markets are moving, we know that the Labor Party are going to introduce this 5% deposit. So is it seeing people rush in before potentially there is going to be greater demand in that area? And what we can see from the chart that I've brought up there in terms of the lowest value quartiles, that is equal first in Melbourne. It's leading in Brisbane. It's leading in Adelaide. It's leading in Perth. It's the lowest in Hobart. It's the second level in terms of Darwin, and it's leading in the ACT. So that's telling us again that there's a lot of pressure on affordable homes in those markets, and we expect that the rising tide will do a fair bit of that heavy lifting. So the unintended consequences of the 3% buffer rates and all that is, again, pushing investors into that market. So that's what we're seeing. Interestingly, Sydney has got the traditional way in which we see markets move, which is the ripple effect, which is the top 75% quartile is actually growing the strongest. And that's the only market that we're seeing that. And I think that's probably also a product about this, the affordability. Well, Sydney's got a mature price level now. So for those outer city markets to move higher and get that demand into them, that those higher and more expensive markets will need to move first. Then the middle markets will need to go, and then ultimately that again will trickle out to a cycle of some of those outer suburb markets and that outer suburb land being sold and moving the values in those areas. So yeah, it's there's no real change. We've seen this pattern for the last couple of years. We're seeing a lot of, coming back to the buyer's agent thing, we're seeing a lot of buyer's agents spruiking the great returns that they're getting in this cheaper end of the market, the percentages that they're getting. And that's, again, a product of So it's not wrong in the sense that it's a product of the machinations of the market and where the market forces are pushing demand. And obviously with limited supply, that's why we're seeing those bottom end of the markets doing really well. Of course, the logical question that you should always ask yourself in these particular situations is this: how can those markets ever get past this little run if the more expensive markets don't move?
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, so it is a timing story, absolutely. But then it's like, how long are they then going to basically do nothing for until those other markets also adjust? Because that's the reality here. You'll never see markets moving where the property value and the land value out wide is going to be more expensive than the scarcer land associated in with the city. And I'm putting together a little report on that, which I'll hopefully share on the pod at some point in the future, around how these big city centres and how they perform and how they work. Because I think there's interesting dynamics in terms of some of these bigger cities and the economic consequences of when you get knowledge workers and those types of things all congregating into a particular market. What happens to economic activity? What happens to wealth? What happens to incomes? And also what happens to crime? So I'll talk more about that in a later episode.
Ben, on page 66 of our new book, we've got this diagram here. So for those who are watching, they'll see it. But for those who are listening, it's a picture of a bath that is overflowing. So the water is coming out of it. And as you look at that graph, you can't help but see that that's actually just fulfilling, right? Because isn't it interesting, across a total graph of a 3-month movement, every market is in positive, right? Yeah. So it's kind of showing the fact that, and that's reflecting a time when interest rates were at their peak, or having one interest rate movement south. But household cash flows, all of the affordability stuff that's in, and yet the all of the ships are rising, right?
Well, that's the two. So we had obviously the one earlier in the year, and then we've had the second one. So that's off two. But to your point, there's potential.
This one isn't. This map isn't reflecting the second one. So
no, good point. Yes, that's right.
That was my point, right?
Yeah, got it.
So we live in a country that has urbanized around the coast. We don't go inland, and we're most of the people are going into the established centres, which are just overflowing. So the point is, the chart that the point I was trying to make is, if that is what it is in the worst of conditions, what happens as the interest rate cycle starts to continue south? We get more sugar hits. What happens when we let more people into the country? And what happens when we continue to be undersupplied on the amount of... So therefore, what I see in that graph is just eternal optimism around the long-term impact of what we're trying to do here. So
mate, I think we need to let our community go. We've had another great show.
Yeah.
We had a good chat. Thanks for those who hung around to the end.
As always, Ben. But mate, it's been fun, the last two-parter that we've done on the podcast, and hopefully our communities benefit from that. But mate, until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Only if you act on it, folks. See you next week.